John Ikel. Hey, it is a pleasure to have you on the David Anderson Talking Market Data podcast. You are sitting at home. We're both sitting up. This is a Sunday. Are we mad or what?
Yep.
And I'm very shocked. I said this earlier on. I mean, you could have put a tie on. I mean, I think it's a bit shocking that on a Sunday you're not wearing a tie. I am impressed you're wearing a jacket on a Sunday.
It was hanging around, David. It's part of my. If you can't wear tweed,
You are a bit of a dapper man, I would describe you. But you've normally got your pocket handkerchief, and anyway,
it's a bit of a family trait. Apparently, my father was the same, and his father was the same. So
I'm a scruff. This is my smart look. Anyway, so look, John. We're going to have a good chat. We've already discussed some of the things we're going to talk about, but just to kick us off, set the scene. I am going to put on the descriptions of when this is published your LinkedIn so people can see your illustrious career, but talk briefly about that as well. I will put Morgan Stanley's web address as well. Not that anybody really probably needs much explanation about who Morgan Stanley is. I mean, normally when I've got people working for, frankly, smaller, less well-known firms, they do want to explain what their firm is and who it is. I don't really think Morgan Stanley needs much introduction or explanation. And John, I think you want to set the scene a bit on that John Ikel, Morgan Stanley bit as well. So I'll let you do that. So kick us off with, drum roll, who is John Ikel? Where did you come from? What stone did you crawl out from under and appear here? Okay,
so as we often discuss, like most people in the industry, I fell into market data. I didn't intentionally go there. I just ended up there. So I started my financial markets career back in, I interviewed 97, right after Christmas in 98. I started at what was CSFB. It just moved from CS First Boston to Credit Suisse First Boston, CSFB, in the IT department. And after a couple of years there, I ended up being second line app support for these market data apps that we've started to get. So I installed the first version of DataStream for Windows. I was supporting Market Sheet for Windows, Reuters Trader Workstation.
Yeah, that was the FX thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, we only had Open Bloombergs back then, so Travelers were being installed so people could remotely work. But laptops were unusable for that kind of stuff. And then web delivered services, because I worked for the investment banking division there. So we started to have things like LexisNexis, Bureau van Dijk. All of these things started to become market data services that I worked with collaboratively with the library. And in fact, weirdly, some of the people I worked with in the library back then, well, not weirdly, but some of them moved into market data, and others of them I ended up working with at 3DI when decades later I moved into that. So I fell into market data. But with that technical background, probably what I'm best known for, we started doing a project in around 2005. We nicknamed it Stop It and Tidy Up, which was a 80s children's TV program narrated by Terry Wogan. And we did a review based on the fact that these Reuters business principles had come out of all application usage of market data to try and work out whether there was something going on there. And then that segued into a career of 20 years being the guy that deals with data compliance, supports or directly manages audits, and speaks to tech team about the real-time market data they're consuming on whether they're supposed to do things or not. I was at Credit Suisse for 11 years and then went through various other firms, spent 7 years working at a consultancy, and now I'm at Morgan Stanley.
Well, you were BNP for a while, I remember.
I was at BNP Paribas for... I don't tend to leave. I've got laid off from two of the positions I was at. I've only resigned, I think, twice in my entire career. So I was at Paribas for 13 years. At Credit Suisse was 11 years.
Crikey.
So
you're a stayer. That's good. No, yeah.
Apparently, it's a Taurian trait. I tend to just be loyal and stay in one location. So
and then you were at 3DI before Morgan Stanley, which I think is it different because you'd been very much at user firms, consumer firms predominantly.
Yes, but well, I mean, 3DI, they're consultant that they consult for the consumer side.
Yeah.
So the way that I saw that role and the way that role ran was that I was doing what I had done at the consumer firms I worked for, and through IPUG and FISD, where people would come to me and ask me for advice on, I've got this data compliance issue, how do I do that? It was just that now someone was, rather than getting free advice from me as a favour, they were paying 3DI for me to have exactly the same conversations that I'd been having for decades before. So for me, it was no different. It was exactly the same thing. I was just doing it in a different location and via a different mechanism.
How long at Morgan Stanley? I mean, we're doing this
It'll be
on
3 years at Christmas.
April the 27th, 2025 is when this is being
Yeah,
recorded.
it'll be 3 years at Christmas 25. So, and the main reason I took that is that Morgan Stanley is the largest. If you look at any league table of tier one investment banks or top three investment banks, we're in there, but we're not number one. And if you look at the wealth management firms, we're in the top three, but we're not number one. But we're the only firm that's in both. So it was like, wow, that's a big deal.
It's a serious player. It has been for many years.
And funny that, talking about longevity, I'm the fourth person to sit in the seat since the 90s. And I know very well two of those people. Bill Lee, industry giant, right?
New York, yeah.
Still going. Ed Flynn was number two. Then
Who was
there
number
was a
three?
brief period of I think 2 years, maybe slightly more than that. Matt Garrity used to be at Fidessa. He was there. And then he left and they headhunted me. So it's
I know
replacing
Bill and Ed.
Bill and Ed.
Yeah.
Bill and Ed's most
I should probably
excellent
have them as a
adventure.
double act. I mean, they are characters in the industry on the other side of the pond in the US.
Following those footsteps, well,
Ed's technically retired. Bill, I think, is still working.
Bill is still at Interactive Brokers, and Ed is currently on a yacht going around or sailboat,
which was
around
his.
Maine.
He loved selling, didn't he? Sailing, not selling, sailing.
He'll be back. He'll be back doing something.
Exactly. So, in Morgan Stanley again, I think this is going to be a good segue, and what we're going to get into the meat of the conversation is. Well, tell us what you do, and then that will be the segue into our discussion. So what do you do at Morgan Stanley?
So I'm the global category lead for exchange data licensing within Morgan Stanley's market data team, and that sits within global supplier sourcing, GSS, which is the procurement function.
That in itself, maybe we spend a couple of minutes talking about that, because I had a long conversation a couple of days ago with Sally Hines, who used to be global head at HSBC. And we were talking about the organizational structure of market data. And there were two dimensions to that conversation. One was, where does the market data group sit? Does it sit in procurement? Does it sit in IT? Does it sit in ops? Does it sit in, I don't know, there were a number of other sort of places that it could report into. And often, even more bizarrely, it moved around. It was like every so often a company would say, oh, it's in IT at the moment, but now let's move it to ops. So it was in ops, let's move it to procurement, and they'd be changing. So that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then the other side, and it was lovely you said category, because when I was talking to Sally, I was really trying to drill down in the different roles within a typical market data team. And I think it's interesting to educate the world about that, because if you're going to work in a firm like a Morgan Stanley, it's good to know those. But again, if you're trying to deal from outside with a firm, Morgan Stanley or any other big, it's good to understand these different roles. I'm old enough to remember it was all one person, the comms manager, who did everything, but it's over time, it's matured, it's become all of these different sub-elements. So what's your experience and your view on where market data sits. And I'll add one thing in. Morgan Stanley is a bit unusual. I know, because you work for Ken Brady, who I know well. I think you're more on the commercial data side as contrasted against the tech IT, i.e. the distribution platform side of things. That some market data teams, that all comes under one management structure, but not at Morgan Stanley. I mean, what are your views generally about what's the optimal best practice for where a market data team should report into?
Right. So, I mean, I guess it displays. So we're global supply services.
Is that procurement by another
So that's
name?
part of procurement. So it is the procurement. It is the name for the procurement function. So that's actually sits within Morgan Stanley, within corporate services. We are in charge. We're a key part. Market data is in a massive expense line. So it sits within the strategic sourcing area to make sure that the costs are appropriate.
To your knowledge, has it always sat there, or has it been moved around? You might not know.
When I joined, it was part of finance, and it was re-engineering expense management at that point. Way back, market data was its own function, and it was joined, as you said, with IT. But then over time, organisations evolved and they separated it into the sourcing, and the IT bits were moved. Real-time market data moved into IT. And that's actually I've seen that a lot, right? Credit Suisse was the same. We used to be one organisation, and then again, Credit Suisse did the same thing. They moved market data business management, as they called it, out into as part of procurement, and the market data commercial team moved fully into procurement as a category. BNP Paribas was the same; it was part of procurement. The head of market data reported to the chief procurement officer in Paribas.
Sally was saying yesterday she was observing that sometimes procurement was a bit of a blunt object, a blunt. They didn't quite understand the nuance and subtlety of market data. We know in market data we're special and different or whatever, but I'm being slightly flippant because we are a bit special, but how special we are, I don't know. In terms of, she was using the analogy that often procurement think that market data is just like buying pencils or pens, or I flippantly joked on a panel once, it's like toilet paper, whereas we know it isn't. I mean, have you found any tension or between talking to pure procurement people who have a very clear idea of how most effectively to procure, to negotiate, in ways that don't always work in the market data world? Or are we just kidding ourselves? Are we just pretending to be more special than anybody else?
No, it's just different. There isn't tensions, and I'm guessing that's because it's managed very effectively above me. It's different. It's seen as something that we're buying in, but it can't be treated the same way as real estate, IT, professional services. It's
Stationary.
A different kettle of fish, right?
Yeah.
And again, within a procurement function, you've got people that are managing the buildings and people that are managing the IT services. Well, those aren't the same. Yeah. Those are managed differently. So it's just understanding and educating upwards around the nuances around what you're doing. Where it gets interesting, and I guess is to your point, it's my area that is kind of odd, if you like. Exchange data licensing is not sourcing, because I'm not negotiating contracts for the data. I'm not negotiating the terms and conditions. I'm not negotiating the usage rights, because those are prescribed and already regulated. So I'm buying data packages off the shelf, and I'm buying usage rights that fit the purpose and having to maintain those.
Let's come on to that. But let me, again, I'm trying to build on a storyline that I picked up with Sally, where we were talking about the role of business analysts.
Yeah.
Who liaise with the business and try and understand the needs of the business and communicate that with other groups like your good selves. Then there are vendor managers. So there's some, you need an expertise and speciality to deal with Bloomberg or S&P or LSEG or whatever, and doing probably that negotiating of the contract.
Yeah.
But you're not a vendor manager. Although, do you have vendor managers that deal with exchanges?
So,
Does that make sense?
right. So I deal with the relationship with the supplier. So I have the relationship with all of the exchanges, or people in my team do. We've fragmented it and split it up.
Yeah.
Different people. I've got a team. People are dealing with different exchanges, and we speak to those exchanges constantly about what their needs are.
So they are
So
like
that's
vendor managers.
no, absolutely.
They are.
It's just the conversation we're having is not. We've got a 2-year renewal coming up for renewal. Are we going to renew? What price? Well, we want this price. You want that price. It's not that classic back and forth contract negotiation renewal. It's, do you have a license that covers this use case? You've just announced this new license. I need to understand the nuances of that license and then speak to technologists and through the advisor team quite often, who have that relationship with the business to understand, okay, this is what is needed. This is what the supplier wants. Where do we fit? And then we get to the combined, and I take that back and I get that license in place, or my team do.
So crikey, where do we start talking about exchange licensing? I mean, I remember having conversations with Bill Lee probably 20 years ago about all of this. I mean, it seems to me as an outside observer, it's got more and more complicated over the last few years. And probably one of the most complicated elements of it is the sort of non-display side. I mean, I started my life in 1984 selling Telerate terminals, and it was bums on seats or eyeballs. It was terminals, physical terminals. And frankly, it was a particular exchange, one access or two accesses, if you had two terminals. And that was, you counted them. That's how you counted them.
Well, yeah, everything was based on per seat licensing. I mean, the first Windows licenses. So I was talking to someone about this the other day. The first Windows licenses you had, pre-Windows for Workgroups, the license and your office version was installed on the machine, the physical machine under your desk. And the Open Bloomberg was on that basis as well. And the entitlements were tied to that as well. So then over time, as networks became more common, that moved from a physical machine license to a user-based machine. User-based license.
A network access, user
and so it's okay. Well, how many times can you log in interactively? So we have the different unit accounts still in place today, per user, per device. Then some providers allow you to have a MISA agreement where you're counting the human being, irrespective of the number of logins and number of places they're logged in, and the number of providers that they've got. So they allow you to net down to there. But so that's the evolution just from an end user perspective. So yeah, you're right. The first market data people, someone who is a long time, much retired now, but Ian Seaberg back in the day, he was one of the first market data people, and he used to describe his first market data job as run the coaxial cable underneath the desks, put it in the back of the monitor, get a Dymo label, write Reuters, stick it under the button, and then they press the button and up comes their green screen because it was a green cathode ray tube with that page, and you had to press buttons to change which page screen you wanted to look at. Those were the first market data jobs, and that's why they came out of the comms teams, to your point, because they were running the comms cable.
Yeah, exactly.
But now with the internet delivery and technology has changed, you don't need to be a technologist. So that's why it's evolved. Back in the way back, market data was in comms. Then it became general IT as we got network. You needed to know a bit about that, and typically market data people were probably just going and installing and onboarding another IT service. So that was being done. Now it's a procurement function because the licensing has become more complex. Used to be you just signed a
Massively more.
right? It used to
Massively
just
more.
be
Yeah.
sign your Bloomberg order form, tick the things that you want. There you go. That's done. You're going to update it. You have a conversation with the account manager and you change things. Now it's how are you using the data? What's it going to happen with it? Where are you distributing it? What things are you going to create out of that data? Because if I own the data and you're going to make more money from my data, I want some of that money because you couldn't do it without my data.
So there's it's an intellectual property discussion, and the big debate, and we probably are going to touch on it. There's a big debate going on at the moment. Good old Nikki Beattie and Market Structure Partners have sort of put out a big report that has stirred the industry up, depending which side you tend to sit on.
Yeah.
And it's become complicated because my observation is, and I don't have the solution to this. I'm so pleased to be talking about it because I don't know what the right answer is. But I come from a marketing and sales background, and when you're talking about one of the key elements of marketing and sales, marketing is pricing. And there are two fundamental models as to how you approach pricing. You either do cost plus. So if you're manufacturing something, all the bits of metal and how many hours of human being, you work out how much it costs to produce it, and then you add a percentage on top of that, and that's the price you charge and the profit. The other thing is a market pull, which is about you price based on the value. And I always think I remember I've been quite a few times to Disney World in Florida with my daughter, and you get there and you go, my God, this is expensive. How expensive is this? But go on, I'll pay it. In other words, they've got it
The market
just
sets the
right.
rate.
Yeah,
Right?
if they charge a bit more, I'd have said let's go somewhere else. But it was just enough. It was painful, but I would put up with it. And it was not based on the cost of building all the rides and the stuff. It is literally how much I and others were willing to pay for it. And I struggle because I know there are arguments. I think ESMA themselves, with reasonable
Yeah.
commercial basis, have been trying to argue that
It should be cost
data
plus.
it should be based on the cost of production. But I'm going to throw one other point. I'm going to let you have a word in edgeways. I'm quite animated about this
No,
because
that's
I
good.
struggle with it. I struggle with it. It's a digital product. It's not you're producing a car or something where you've got your bits of metal in your production, and then the whole thing about a digital product. Music is a classic digital product, video is films and TV and what have you, and they're not based on the cost of production. It's because once you've produced it, there is a fixed cost of producing something, but the variable cost of going to 10 customers or 10,000 customers is very different because there isn't a cost in much of a cost difference in delivering to 10 or to 10,000. I mean, there are some support.
There are some nuances, right? There
Yeah,
are some
but
nuances. But I
do you
mean,
see what
movies is actually a really bad example because the amount of people that are employed and the production costs that go into a movie are
they often
huge.
lose? They often
They
lose,
often
don't they?
don't make money,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
either a hit or it's straight to TV and it didn't make any money whatsoever, right?
But Nikki Beattie, and again, I must talk to Nikki. I know it, but I didn't quite buy into her pizza analogy. She had a pizza analogy in in one of the things she was talking about,
Yeah.
and I don't think market data is like pizza. It's like music or film or movies or TV. It's a digital product which has its own nuances, as you know.
Well, I mean, yeah, you've got digital rights management that we want to overlay on
Yeah,
it. When you're talking to Debbie Lawrence about ODRL, there was the
yeah.
comment made that is this dead? Well, it's not dead. It's simmering away in the background. It's just that Ben at Deontic has got other fish to
Ben has
fry.
agreed to be on my podcast, so Ben's going to do
Fantastic,
my podcast.
fantastic. Because what he's doing, they are they are. So I have to say, right, I'm on here as me, not representing Morgan Stanley. So we've touched upon some Morgan Stanley stuff. That's me, but me very much talking generalizations, right? But for my money right now, Ben is one of the tech companies that I'm really interested in, because the way that he's approached things and the tech that they've got and the the AI and everything else that they're doing really speaks to me as a data licensing person, because it gets over a lot of the barriers. So what do I mean by the barriers? So the things that everybody is really hung up on at the moment is, okay, we've got this product that we're buying and it's market data. This is the thing. But here's the terms and conditions that are with it. And there are people, and so let me answer your point first, right? I think it's down to the providers to determine what they want to charge for their product. Apple charges me a lot of money for an iPhone. I really want the iPhone. Bloomberg, really expensive terminal. But like the iPhone, people that love it, people want it. If that's what people are prepared to pay, that's what people are prepared to pay. The market has set the rate. It should be ideally based on cost plus, but unless there's a massive pushback from the business or a wholesale turning around by major firms across the industry saying, we're not going to pay that, that's too expensive, we're going to go with another provider, then great. But the problem there that we've got is that, and this is, I think, where some of the argument's coming from, is that the exchanges, you want the market data from that exchange in that country.
It's non-fungible is a phrase I've
right?
heard. You can only get it from a bit of data. X bit of data is only available from exchange A.
Yes.
And therefore, if you want that X bit of data, because there's always this argument, well, go somewhere else and get the data, and you can to some extent. I mean,
and the European Commission was arguing that, right, that it's a monopoly in some respects for some of the exchanges.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Steve Dorian of SIBO is going to be on my Tuesday podcast, and so SIBO shook things up a bit, didn't they?
I mean, SIBO make enough money from their trading that their data is commercially a lot cheaper, and they are,
but also
a lot. Yeah, in some respects, I'm not rubber stamping them, but that you can have a better conversation with them around your usage rights and your commercials, and they quite often have good enterprise deals and things.
Yeah, because they took advantage of the breakdown of the concentration rules. I think MiFID I was it MiFID? I think it was MiFID I, not MiFID II, where the where a country could say all the data must come on Deutsche Börse from Germany. You can't have anybody else other than the German exchange doing this, and the London exchange doing British ones, and the Paris doing French. And the concept was no other people could compete in those, and you could get data from other providers. I'm not sure it's a completely fair, free marketplace, but I'm going to say one other thing, and again, I'm frankly pontificating here. I don't have any skin in the game, but a lot of the MiFID protections to stop the naughty, nasty exchanges taking advantage of the poor customers. I believe the poor customers were the men on the street in Brussels, or in retail traders.
It's retail. It's retail.
They weren't really designed to look after that desperately impoverished company, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, UBS. I mean, I think there's something out of kilter there. I'm not trying to do down Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, but
I mean, see, for me, that falls back to use cases, right? So someone, a day trader sitting in their bedroom or spare room, right, on their terminal, they should pay bare minimum for the data because they are just plugging away. Where it gets interesting is the enterprise licenses or those wider usage rights that move beyond display. So again, this was the part I started to make. So
I'm going to shut up more.
So back to the point. Exchange vendors can charge what they want for their data, right? If the market want to use the use case or have to use the use case, then it's down to the consumer firm to have the conversation around whether that is acceptable or not. but broadly, most of the participants in the market, we accept it. We get a lot of pushback internally from the business who say that's ridiculously expensive. I'm not going to make any more money for non-display fee going up by X amount. I'm not going to change, so it's just going to impact my P&L or whatever.
But then that person would stop doing that and stop buying the data, and that would be a signal.
If they could.
Yeah.
The bigger problem that I have as a licensing specialist is the terms and conditions being so nuanced. It's not even a problem. It's just a challenge for me to have to deal with. So a lot of people talk about standardized terms and conditions, and some people within the market read that as standard pricing. I don't talk about standard pricing because I can see both sides, right? But if supplier A wants to charge X and customer B is willing to pay it, that's it. It's you pay your money, you take your choice. Where I think the industry would be good, and I think that was Devin's point, was that on her podcast with you, is that it would be better to have some standardized terms and standardized definitions so that we know, for example, it's accepted across all suppliers that non-display usage for trading purposes covers these use cases, and they're all well articulated. Everybody's has the same definition, because if you have the same definition, you can have one system with a definition, and you've got to get this license, this license, this license. You've got to get that license from all of the markets they've got access to. At the moment, we have to use a third-party tool to understand, okay, terms in the policy says this could be best interpreted as this, therefore this is the thing. But non-display for trading bounces around. There's even one exchange, I won't mention who it is, but they don't have the concept of internal application usage. So their non-display for viewing, their non-display usage license covers viewing of data in a trading scenario. But it's called the non-display license. If it's called non-display, it's not a human being at the end.
So they've jumped on a bandwagon. They've
just gone, well, we don't have that license, so shove it in that one. But that doesn't help me. You should have a separate enterprise usage view charge type thing, or a license to do something.
And I think our little segue just then is an important one, because I think there's a totally distinct discussion, dare I say, argument about the pricing level, how much should be charged, which we started off talking about, cost plus or market.
Yeah.
But I do genuinely think it's a totally separate discussion about the complexity and nuances of all these different license types. And there's a little bit of crossover, because by having all these scenario-based, case-based pricing in non-display, it pushes the price level up. So I suppose it's not, my perfect distinction doesn't quite exist. But my sense in talking to people like you is, it's one reason I don't have an excuse for no hair, but you have an excuse for slightly less hair, having pulled it out over the years. Because it's so bloody confusing. All of these, trying to read these contracts and make sense of them must be, I hear often,
and it's got harder. It has got harder, right? Because there are more now. And there are some venues out there who have these licenses that most firms don't understand have those licenses in place, because they're really small. But they've followed the bigger players and gone, well, we're going to produce this. There's even one or two who give their data free of charge via the major consolidated data feeds, and you can't segregate it out to a identifiable product line, data products that you can actually permission to people. But there are non-displays commercials available. So how do I segregate that data? How do I control it? And that's the problem that we have, right?
So
It's understanding the usage rights that you have, then controlling that so that you can accurately license and report it, and ultimately deal with any audits that come your way.
and you might argue with, say, I don't agree that you should have a clause that says that, but that's a separate discussion. It The discussion we're having now is just trying to understand what the clause means, and I suppose at your end, have you got the services and technology to be able to comply with that? Because I've heard a lot of people on the customer side saying, look, whether we agree or disagree with a particular clause or something, some of the clauses we have no physical way of actually implementing that without a massive technological system upgrade. Our systems, again, I come from the Reuters background, so DAX, Data Access Control
Yeah,
System, and then I think I always get this wrong on Bloomberg. Is it EMRS?
yeah.
Which is if I
Entitlement,
said the last,
entitlement management and reporting system.
those are the big. There are other vendors out there with the ones as well, but again, if those systems or something you built yourself cannot control the access in the way the contract says, you're exposed. I mean, that must be an uncomfortable.
Well, right. So with the incumbent entitlement control systems that you have, there isn't the nuance to say that you can now say within those systems it is a physical end user or it is a server ID, right? But what you can't get is more granular than that. This is EMRS does have the concept of declaring that it's a non-display application versus a display application. Refinitives don't. LSEG relies on
LSEG.
LSEG relies on the market data admin, whoever's controlling DAX, putting the appropriate non-display or display licenses in and assigning the correct entitlement product. So again, there you're introducing a human error that could happen. DRDM, that you spoke to Alan Ross about DRDM.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. That is very interesting because that goes beyond DAX, or maybe you could call it a post-DAX world. To quote, Steve Jobs in his post-PC era. That is very interesting in terms of technology spec because that does dive into separating that use case. But that is still an on box. That is still you within DRDM as the admin saying, this is a display application, this is a non-display, this is doing derived data. It relies on the knowledge piece being coming from the IT teams, the development teams building these systems, giving the ones controlling the data an honesty statement saying this is what we do, which further down the line, the audit is looking at that use case and saying, you've said it's A, we've looked at it, we think it's C. You owe us a back charge for that. So until we get, and DRDM is heading that way, everywhere else it's manual. Everywhere else it's us taking, going out, very old school, go out, interview application owners. Application owners fill out a form. They could be doing that in 3DI's DCDM product, in Calero's Access Application Control Manager, in Axon's Act. Someone fills out a form, submits it. Someone has to receive that, interpret that, and then determine what licensing use case goes on top of that. Then you have to go off to the entitlement system and make sure that you've got the right stuff and that you've got the in licensing. All of these things, they're not quite yet in sync and talking to each other. And it's still a lot of manual lift.
When I said I was going to give you a chance at the end to say whatever you'd missed, you said, make sure I get to say about things being disconnected.
Yeah.
Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's the data compliance and usage rights ecosystem as it stands. Nothing actually talks to anything else at the moment.
And whose fault is that? Whose fault is that?
It's you don't really have. So there's a phrase that I hear bandied about from my US colleagues. So there's no one doing soup to nuts, right? There's no one owning the entire widget. Another way to look at it, owning the licensing all the way through, from feed ingestion all the way through to inventory, which controls you paying the bill. it's not one connected ecosystem. If I had billions and built up my own little private equity, I would buy various players in the marketplace and force them to build that one ecosystem, because whichever and these firms could partnership together to do that, but no one's actually done it yet. As
Well,
soon as someone does, they're
you,
gonna get a lock on the industry, because that means that I won't have to spend my time doing this stuff. Everything will talk to each other.
it's all going to be solved by data catalogs. Data catalogs are going to solve it all.
No,
I
David,
knew
no.
I was winding you up. I was
If
winding you up.
I open my office door in London and I throw a stick, I'm going to hit someone who's trying to sell me a data catalog. A data
Is
catalog
it?
is
Yeah.
not the same as a usage rights library, right?
But it still has value. It's just it's
Not
or
not
not.
not
I mean,
not for
again,
what I do. Not for what I do.
right.
Right. A data catalog is and some of my friends in the industry sell data catalogs, right? So I'm not putting them down. It's a list, right? It's a directory. At worst, it's a telephone directory of just names. Sometimes you get some additional metadata underneath it, but it just tells you who's out there and what they're offering. Some of these systems, these catalogs, are eventually going to go down the route of having a usage rights piece next to it,
Right.
but not all of them have that. The usage rights is everything. So on the other side, you've got
Richard Clements and Vendex. Have you come across that?
That's a catalog, right? There isn't the usage rights in there. If you want the usage rights in there, that is uploading your contracts into their usage rights system. So the catalog providers, so some of these players have a catalog, but they also have a commercial rights database that is separate. Sometimes they have linked the two. So when you upload your contract, it gets you to pick from their catalog that this is coming from Bloomberg as the supplier, and it's the contract for the Bloomberg professional service, because that's the normalized name that we've got. But a lot of the catalogs, they're just normalized names that pick lists for the inventory. So someone in the inventory has put in Jeff's discounted Bloomberg terminal or whatever, right? The catalog will know that should be in the bucket of Bloomberg professional service or Bloomberg anywhere, whatever the normalized name is. So the catalogs are there to give you a list of vendors and services for service discovery and service selection. So there might be some metadata there so that you can say, I want this asset class from this geography, and it helps you find out what's out there, because the number of market data suppliers is so fast you can't know anything. But the contract rights is different. And that's where Ben, you'll talk to Ben about this, about Deontic, right? Where he's got shredding contract. I've looked at numerous, systems that are out there. A lot of them can't handle market data contracts because they're different to commercial contracts.
Well, because there is a little sub-genre now, and maybe Ben and Deontic were the first at doing it, of trying to, what's what I'm talking about, to digitize rights from a written contract.
From market data contracts.
From market data contracts, which
there are other firms, Kingland,
Jordan and Jordan are doing something,
Syrian.
I think.
There's loads of legal contract rights systems out there that use LLMs to shred huge and finance systems, huge amounts of financial paperwork and legal paperwork. But most of those contracts follow a kind of a common layout, so it's quite easy for the system to read it. Market data contracts do not follow that standardized layout. They're all different and all unique, so it's more nuanced. So you need more specialist systems, more specialized AIs and language models that can read those contracts and shred them up.
And what you seem to be saying at the moment is things might be coming. DRDM, you seem pleasantly animated, positively animated by, but there's nothing there yet. I mean, I love Ben Whittam-Smith of Deontic, because I remember on FISD, I think it was January 2019, did my first DRM panel discussion, and it was driven by JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, who were trying to get this solved with, because Ben was then at Refinitiv before he'd made Deontic, because it came out of Refinitiv. But my rather pessimistic view is they've been working on it. When was that? 2019? What are we at now? That's 6 years, 6+ years, and we're still not there.
Ben will talk to you about that. It was the first thing was ODRL, right? It was, can we use the W3C's digital rights management piece to build out how we would structure a digital contract? See, things have moved on. That is still there, but that was on that original basis, and Ben needs to talk about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time because I'm aware of it. But it was taking the paper contract and making a digital version of that.
Yeah.
That was the pre-AI world. Now we've got large language models where you don't need to create a digital version of the paper contract, because an AI will read that paper contract and will correctly go, oh, these are your definitions. This is your internal usage rights. These are your external usage rights. These are your, and categorize that for you. So suppliers don't need to write the digital version, which was what the original problem was that suppliers didn't want to write a digital contract, despite the fact ultimately it would massively have helped them.
Well, that's another thing. By the way, I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 46, so we got about 14 minutes left. So, but we're in the thick of it. So let's keep going. Another thing about the digitizing of contracts that I was always struggled with was the ambiguous phrases in contracts, especially exchange contracts. Therefore, if it's ambiguous in English language or whatever, a computer can't digitize that. And if you drill down into the ambiguity, I asked a few exchanges about this, and I got the distinct sense that in several cases, not all cases, it was deliberate. It was conscious. It was put in there because I said, well, why don't you be precise and explicit? And it was said to me, but David, the people at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, they're really clever. They're really clever. And what they'll do is they'll decipher and they'll game it. They'll find some way of sort of getting around. It's a bit like tax. Was it tax avoidance and tax evasion? Evasion.
I disagree with that. Maybe 20 years ago that might have been the case. I don't know anybody in the industry who's like, oh, I'm a bit I'm going to be non-compliant. No one wants to be non-compliant. We don't have the time to be non-compliant. We want to be compliant.
And the risk,
We don't want the risk. So to your point, some market data teams are now spread out, and there is an argument for my types of roles to actually sit within risk, because it's a commercial risk, and we're having to deal with that. But that doesn't sit within procurement.
So are there still ambiguous terms in contracts, in market data contracts? Is there ambiguity lurking there?
So it's just some of the terms are difficult to understand and interpret, and some of them you will read a market data policy and you will see what you're looking for could sit within non-display for trading, or it could sit within non-display non-trading, because it might be like risk management, but it's hanging off of a trading thing. So there are nuances, and that's where you have to have a conversation with the supplier. If the industry as a whole just came together and went, we're going to hash out that, we're going to set standards for what definitions are, so that removes that ambiguity, then you can actually build out correct licensing models and systems, and we would get rid of audits. What I like about, one of the things that's going to make some people go on the DRDM side is there's a concept of you exposing to the exchanges, if you want, what you are doing, and tell them. But that's not a new concept. It's just taking the TMX true up audit concept and making and putting a technology stack around that and making that happen rather than you having to fill out paper. I want to work smarter, not harder. So removing some of these barriers and challenges for me and giving me a technology platform that largely drives itself with just me, conducting. I want to conduct the orchestra. I don't want to have to play every single instrument. So give me more tools to do that, provided I can get budget, but give me more tools to do that. And you're onto a winner because it's just going to run. And once it's running smoothly, it's not going to go anywhere because I can't afford to, back it out.
I'm gonna pivot because you just gave me a segue into something, and we're running. I mean, we could spend another 3 hours talking about exchange data licensing. I mean, it's that complicated, it's that important, but we're not going to.
Billy Connolly's been on Parkinson a lot of times, and you are Parkinson of market data.
Exactly. We'll have round 2 and round 3, but. You just made an interesting little quip about, I get this tool that could do all these things if I could get budget. And something I'm conscious of, and this is a little bit political, so treat it delicately. I don't want to put you in an awkward situation. But I'm very conscious that big entities, big investment banks spend millions and millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions on market data.
Yeah.
And your job amongst many of your peers is to try and control that, constrain that, reduce it, optimize it to, in different sorts of ways. But departments like yours are not given big budgets. I've heard stories about, well, I wanted to get this tool and it would have saved the bank, but they wouldn't give me a budget. They wouldn't let me buy it. They said, keep using your spreadsheets or something.
Yeah, it's all about the sale internally. If you can convince stakeholders further up how much you're going to save, some of these tools will get purchased because they are AI, machine-led, and they are going to bring about operational efficiency and allow people to do less time. It's speaking to various people across the industry. It's not about. It isn't always about the money. It's more about the use case and are we spending our money well? So, what's the bang for buck? Right? What am I going to get if I spend that much? I could spend this much, or I could spend this much. Well, if I spend this much, but what I'm actually getting is this much value, then I might as well spend this much and get that much value.
I'll repeat a story that a friend of mine used to tell. He said, David, it's like I'm going out selling this product, and this product is a £20 note, and I'm selling them for £10. And I knock on the doors of all these, and invariably the message I get back is, that's great, but I've got no budget. And the point is, it's an absolute watertight, clear cut. It will make you money, save you money, whatever, but there's no budget. Well, I suppose the point I'm trying to get at is how open is the door if you've got a really clear articulate, and how difficult is it to get budget out of the central bucket of money at a big investment bank? Everybody's trying to cut costs. Do you just hit a brick wall because you hit this cost-cutting mantra and spending money is an anathema to that?
No. So just from a broad industry perspective, as long as you can show that there's going to be operational efficiency, that seems to be where I'm hearing things are going, because that's what AI is designed to do. Is there a fear that you will be so efficient you will remove yourself from the marketplace? As in,
Turkey's
we don't
voting
need you
for Christmas,
anymore,
yeah.
right? Yeah. I guess that, but the forward-thinking groups will just go, well, now you've got the time. What is AI designed to do? AI is designed to remove the admin from our day-to-day lives and allow us to do the higher-level stuff that we should always have been doing, and not the AI stuff. Some of these tools are going to remove that drudgery of getting stuff done, but it doesn't work in siloed systems every single component in the ecosystem needs to be able to talk to every other part, so that we can get the curated list of services in the inventory into the curated list of services in the catalog, if we want a catalog, into the inventory, and that the usage rights from the contract rights repository from either the public store, that's the exchange rights because they're the same for everybody, or the private store, which is our shredded contracts, those are tagged to the data packages, and the data packages and the inventory are all linked together as well. And then the tech stack is also linked to all of that, so that when the developer or an end user goes, I want that piece of information, they know what they can do with it, how much it's going to cost, and no one is going to introduce additional risk to the firm by bringing that on.
Somebody told me that the big problem is this is all disconnected. I can't remember who said that to me.
Possibly
Very
me,
recently.
but it's
It was you. It was you.
It's all disconnected.
Look, I don't. Well, look. You know, we're at the end. We're at the end. So, John, I promised you. You know, if you've got 2 minutes, is there anything? I mean, there's lots of things you didn't get to say, but if you've got 2 minutes worth of something to say that you didn't say it now. Tell the world.
No, I've said it. Just get everything speaking to each other. Stop putting out. I'm not interested in press releases saying that people have got partnerships. Show me the money. Get it talking. Get it talking.
Get real.
Get it real.
No, I and there is some of that going on. Probably from what I'm hearing from you, maybe not enough yet.
Not enough.
But there's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel. There's hope on the horizon. Mixing my metaphors terribly, John. Thank you so much for giving up a Sunday to talk to me, although it's sometimes more convenient to do it than to do it during the week. This has been a pleasure, as it always is when I chat with you. I really appreciate it. And I think, like Billy Connolly on Michael Parkinson, the Americans won't know what the hell we're talking about, but you and I know what we're talking about.
Oh, we should have said like Letterman or
I don't know. Who has
any of the late night chat shows.
Exactly. Anyway, John, thank you. I will bid you farewell on this occasion. I'm going to press the stop recording button.
Brilliant. Thank you, David.